This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to From Guilt to Good, Self-Care Solutions for Busy Caregivers, the podcast rewriting the narrative of self-care. If you're a caregiver feeling stretched thin, torn between responsibilities, and longing for self-care, you are in the right place. I'm Jeanette Yates, a fellow caregiver and someone who spent years doing all the self-care things and never really feeling any better. After years of research, self-exploration, trial and error, I finally found a way to create a sustainable self-care practice that makes me feel good, not guilty. And in From Guilt to Good, we'll explore how you can do that too. Together, we'll hear expert insights, actionable steps, and heartfelt stories to guide you toward rediscovering your worth, reclaiming your health, and getting back the life you've been too busy to enjoy. And today, I am so excited to let you take a seat and listen to this amazing interview that I did with Sarah Cart. Sarah is an author, a writer, and she's also someone who has been a caregiver for her husband. Her story is compelling. And in our conversation together, she tells us a little bit about what happened with her husband and how she became a caregiver and a wife, and how all of that happened. And it all was happening during the beginning of the COVID pandemic here in the United States. And so it was way more complicated than even caregiving, which is already complicated, tends to be. And so she shares a little bit about that experience. And then we also talk about things that she wishes she knew. She suggests some tips for caregivers. Of course, we also touch base a little bit on dealing with the trauma that sometimes occurs with caregiving. And then we talk about her memoir that she is releasing in April of 2024. On My Way Back to You is a love story and a caregiving story. And I can't wait for you to hear this conversation. So I hope you enjoy it. Here is Sarah Cart. If you're an overwhelmed caregiver that longs for some of your life back, craves time for self-care, freedom from the isolation of caregiving and the guilt, then the Empowered Self-Caregiver Cohort is for you. Within the Empowered Self-Caregiver Cohort, we'll take a deeper look into your unique caregiving challenges, assess your current self-care practices, and explore a personalized plan where you feel your self-care focus is most necessary. You'll design a self-care practice that is flexible enough for your life and something that you're going to actually enjoy. Erase your guilt, embrace a sense of worthiness and empowerment, and create an unshakable support system to avoid a lonely caregiving journey. In the Empowered Self-Caregiver Cohort, I share the very steps I took to break the burnout cycle of self-care. As someone who has been a caregiver for over 2 decades, I know what it's like and I know what it takes to finally find balance. And my care framework inside the cohort teaches you to find that balance too. If you're interested in learning more about the Self-Caregiver Cohort, please go to theselfcaregiver.com or check the show description for details. Sarah, I am so glad to have you joining us today. Sarah, you are going to be sharing your story with us, but you're also going to be giving us some practical, like what you wish somebody had told you.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm really looking forward to that. And then we're going to dive more into some things that you think caregivers should do for themselves. And so I just want to welcome you to the podcast and thank you so much for joining me today.
Jeanette, thank you. I'm thrilled to be a part of this. I've watched a few of your episodes and they're really heart-lifting. I wish I'd been able to find them back when I needed them 4 years ago. But thank you.
Well, I believe that making space and opening up, some, authenticity is a buzzword that people use all the time, but like, I'm just here. This is just me. And so, and I appreciate you coming and being a part of that. I think caregivers need to see more caregivers and hear more of their stories. And so I'm really excited for you to dive in today and just tell us, I gave like a brief, if you want to go into any more of this story. Before I hit record, I was like, what was it like to watch everything unfold as your husband's health issues? Like, how did that feel to you?
It started so innocently. He was diagnosed with an autoimmune issue based on some seemed really minor symptoms. He had swelling in his fingers and his feet, and he also developed Raynaud's disease, and a lot of people have heard of Raynaud's syndrome, where his hands would just a change in air conditioning, or when we were up in Pennsylvania, when the weather changes, his hands would just turn ghostly white or really strange blue. And so it was a little bit like just being in a pot of water that then began to boil over years. We didn't quite realize that the water's boiling and you can't get out of the pot of water. That's kind of how
I have heard that analogy for lots of things. And I had a similar experience in my own caregiving because, of course, my mom was diagnosed when I was 8. So like I wasn't like the main caregiver for a while, for a long time, but I was there. But then like, I was like, all of a sudden about 5 years ago, I was like, wait, when did I become a caregiver? When did this happen?
Right. It evolved over a couple of years that suddenly I realized same thing. You have this eureka moment of, wait, whoa. He's the patient and I'm the chief medical secretary and the chauffeur and the cook and bottle washer and I guess I'm a caregiver.
Right.
I guess I'm responsible for everything. It's overwhelming. And every sentence you realize you wake up one morning and figure that every conversation you have begins with what hurts? How can I help? And that really changes your relationship. To have that be the primary driver as opposed to where do we want to go on vacation or have you talked to the kids lately or whatever.
It's interesting. As you were talking about that, I did think about like that, like all of a sudden you realize you're a caregiver, but we all family caregivers have another relationship with their person before they become their caregiver.
Yeah.
And so like, it sounds like that, like maybe at first you were just doing wife things. You're cooking dinner or you're just a little bit of extra here and there.
Right. You're taking some medication. Okay. No biggie. And then, over the course of that first summer, he was diagnosed in the wintertime. And after the 6 months later, all of a sudden he dropped 35 pounds that he didn't really have to drop because the disease had gotten into his GI tract. But you talk about caregiving. Have you heard the quote from First Lady Rosalind Carter about caregiving?
Yes.
That there are 4 kinds of people.
Yes.
And that's true. I mean, you have been a caregiver, you are a caregiver, you will be a caregiver, or you're going to need one. And the exceptions to that rule are very few, very, very few.
I think it's something that, a lot of people don't think about until it's upon them. And so that's another, everybody that's watching and listening, they're probably already caregivers, but
they're already in it. Yeah.
They're already in it in some way, but a lot of people, are starting to wake up to the fact like, oh, like this is going to happen soon. I might need to pay attention, which brings me to that first part of what I wanted to really chat with you today is like, okay, so we're both, the frog in the lukewarm water that starts boiling. We didn't know until we were already, deep in it. for those people who know it's coming, like they, they have a parent, they see they're aging, they know it's coming, or they have a spouse that maybe is starting to have a few issues here or there. What do you wish that you had known ahead of time?
I wish I'd known I was strong enough for it. And I suppose part of why it takes so long is that you're developing some muscle to handle it. It was a little bit like, it makes me think of when I was pregnant with our first son, and you tell friends who've already got a child or two that, oh, I'm expecting, and they start telling you the labor and delivery stories, and you're not ready for that. You are not ready at all to hear those things. And I think kind of like being pregnant for a really long time, it's so that you can wrap your head around how you get from here to the far side. It takes some time to accept that and embrace it. The NPR host Steve Inskeep talks about how fellow host Linda Wertheimer taught him to deliver. I mean, you're on live radio and you have to deliver bad news in the moment. How do you do that? And he took away from it a metaphor for life, which she said something like, you figure out the situation you're in, and then you face it and go on. And that's what every episode of every chapter of Caregiving was for me. There would be one new thing to learn this week with this diagnosis, one new thing to learn with that pill, and you need to go on IV antibiotics. That means I'm going to be dealing with needles. That's going to go very well. Yeah. So
it is also similar with parenting, where like they send you home with a baby and you're like, what am I supposed, like, what? I don't have any skills. And like with caregiving, they're like, oh yeah, sure. You're just going to do the antibiotics and it's going to be fine. It's like, no, but you got training.
Right. Just make sure that you don't do this. Oh, don't let him have grapefruit juice. I'm sorry. What?
Right. And make sure there's no air bubbles.
Yes. That part.
For any caregiver listening, if you haven't had to deliver any kind of like saline or IV yet, and they are going to tell you about the air bubbles. And I've never been so diligent in getting rid of an air bubble in my life.
They can be very helpful. Those people who might come by and teach you those things can be wonderful, wonderful teachers. So.
Yes, they do, and they will, a lot of times, to your point, they don't just send you away like they do with the baby from the thing. They do actually send somebody to train you to do some things, but it will surprise you what they think you're capable of. So you should, to your point at the beginning, you should know that you are capable. You are strong.
Fortunately, all I ever had to deal with in terms of needles was a PICC line. I never had to do that practice thing with a syringe and an orange and all that.
Yes. Ooh, I know.
I admire the people who can do that. That will not be me.
Well, and I think that's true too. But you know what else is like? Sometimes you think I can never do that, and then the next thing you know, you're like, "Well, here I am.
You're doing it. Yeah,
I'm doing this thing that I thought I wasn't going to be able to do."
Yep, definitely.
And so I think it's also an important point for you to say, like we said, everybody's going to be a caregiver at some point, probably, or and if you are not yet a caregiver, it's a good time to wrap your head around the idea of it. And then I think that would allow you to go ahead and start having conversations and maybe thinking about what you might want to do or be able to do. What do you think?
Well, and I think also by the time you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s, you have experienced watching someone you love approach the end of their life. Probably a grandparent, a parent, maybe a sibling, depending on how old you are, friends, and maybe you were in the periphery of the caregiving circle. When you watch that, you can learn a lot by watching it. The reality of the learning curve when you are suddenly the primary caregiver is pretty steep. One thing I used to do, my mom died a long time ago. I was in my 20s when my mother died, but I used to kind of collect friends who had a background in what my mother died of. So if I ended up with this situation, I would be able to call Nancy or I'd be able to call Jennifer. And caregiving can be kind of that sort of experience too. I'm realizing if I'd really been paying attention, I might have called so-and-so about, so how did you handle this? Here's what's going on now. Here's what I'm hyperventilating about. Well, here's what wakes me up in the night. So.
Yeah. So that is, something that a lot of caregivers I know and a lot of people, that reach out to me, they talk about that hypervigilance that we all have to have, and how it's, that leads to burnout eventually if we don't do something about it.
Right.
But it is something that we all, I think, a lot of things out there for caregivers, like how to avoid burnout. And I'm like, okay, I don't really know if we can avoid it altogether. Maybe we can minimize it, but we're going to be in need of our own care. Like we're going to be in need of our own self-care.
By definition, part of caregiving is crisis management. So,
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about, whether we want to say how to avoid burnout or how to get through it or how to manage. How should caregivers, or what would you suggest? We make a lot of suggestions here on the podcast and let people figure, try on different ideas. But what helped you when you were trying to tend to yourself as well as your husband in those crisis times?
Well, I'm realizing I went through two different kinds of crisis times. One was up through that IV antibiotic stage, and that was a multi-year drift as the water got warmer and warmer and finally began to boil. But then I also had the part where he disappeared for 10 weeks. He went in the hospital during COVID, and I was not allowed to visit him. Wow. And the reason he went into the hospital was because he was literally dying. His kidneys were failing. His heart was failing. Everything was shutting down. He ended up, by the grace of God, getting a heart transplant. And, so the caregiving for myself, or the self-care, had different stages from before he went in the hospital to when he went in the hospital. And then the fire hose of his coming home from the hospital, and my suddenly being responsible for his life, where there'd been a whole team of doctors and nurses and technicians and people delivering hot meals to him 3 times a day. Suddenly it was me, on my own, because it was COVID. We couldn't have home health care. I mean, we were supposed to, but because of COVID, it didn't work quite the way we'd hoped.
Wow.
But the ways I took care of myself, as a writer, it's sort of instinctive for me to journal. So there was a lot of journaling, and that was very helpful. Although I wasn't as disciplined about this as I'd like to think I was, it sounds so neat and clean when I say it, but I would try to end each journal entry with something positive or uplifting, something like, let's go, me, we can do this. It's time to be an adult. Go find your bootstraps. Or, hey, universe, please look out for me today. Please look out for him today. There was during COVID, Oprah Winfrey and Deepak Chopra sponsored an online free meditation series, which was hugely helpful. And I probably only had time for it because it was COVID and he was not home. But it just brought me such peace. When I could make the time to do it, it brought me such peace to devote those 20 minutes a day to that. Breathing. Everyone talks about breathing exercises. For me, it was to exhale. And as I'm exhaling and counting to 5 or 7 or 10 or whatever works for you, to just exhale, thinking of all the things I wanted to get rid of: the anger, the fear, the overwhelm, the grief. And then when I finish exhaling, trying to squeeze out that last bit of air so that I had enough room when I inhaled, again on a count of 5 or 7 or 10. Love, grace, light, grit, determination, strength. That was very helpful. And then all the things you were taught in kindergarten about eating right, sleep, get enough exercise, being accepting with an A of the issues and the reality. Don't sugarcoat any of it, but at the same time, try to push on through it toward what makes life worth living each day or each hour. There were times when we were just going hour by hour, and just try to hold on to that. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You're good. I'll circle back.
Okay. And then the last thing is just establishing when and where you need to protect yourself, setting boundaries, and sometimes you need to be willing to step away or let go. So it all sounds so much easier to say than it is actually to do in the moment.
Well, I love that you shared the things that were so helpful to you. And of course, I'm a big proponent of that mindfulness piece, the breathing. And like, I've been a fitness person. I used to be a fitness instructor, things like that for a long time, but I still did not understand the value of breathing in an intentional way. Like, even if you're listening, you're like, I don't do that. Like, whatever. It's like, no, we promise. If you just pay attention to your breathing, you're probably going to realize you're not breathing.
Right. Or even just sometimes planting both feet on the ground when you do it, and imagining your roots going down into the earth and the light from the universe coming into your system as you breathe in. And it was really, really helpful sometimes to remind you you're not all alone.
If you're an overwhelmed caregiver that longs for some of your life back, craves time for self-care, freedom from the isolation of caregiving and the guilt, then the Empowered Self-Caregiver Cohort is for you. Within the Empowered Self-Caregiver Cohort, we'll take a deeper look into your unique caregiving challenges, assess your current self-care practices, and explore a personalized plan where you feel your self-care focus is most necessary. You'll design a self-care practice that is flexible enough for your life and something that you're going to actually enjoy. Erase your guilt, embrace a sense of worthiness and empowerment, and create an unshakable support system to avoid a lonely caregiving journey. In the Empowered Self-Caregiver Cohort, I share the very steps I took to break the burnout cycle of self-care. As someone who has been a caregiver for over 2 decades, I know what it's like and I know what it takes to finally find balance. And my care framework inside the cohort teaches you to find that balance too. If you're interested in learning more about the Self-Caregiver Cohort, please go to theselfcaregiver.com or check the show description for details. One of the things that you mentioned too is finding the time to do all the things that you already know you're supposed to do, like eating right, moving your body, all of those things. Yeah. Was that hard? Like, are you a person that kind of came into this experience, like already having kind of established routines around those different things? Or is this something you have to develop more, or, we all have to be more intentional during the caregiving years, but like, is there something you kind of already had established?
I came into caregiving finding myself, short, cutting those things off. Like, okay, suddenly I wasn't going in for walks every day. And one of the challenges when my husband came home from the hospital and I was suddenly his sole caregiver, one of the other challenges of his coming home was he, in addition to having received a heart transplant, he came home with a broken hip.
Oh my goodness.
They discovered a week after the transplant, they were calling me on a regular basis to give me updates and ask me questions and have me consent to procedures and all the rest. And, by the way, did anybody mention this broken left hip? And the doctor it was a phone call. It was not a FaceTime, but he was so relieved by the tone of my voice of, I can probably tell you when that happened. Because they didn't know if it happened on their end or mine. And,
oh, bless.
And I said, he about a week before he ended up in the hospital, he was so ill. He was on the IV antibiotics. He was not sleeping. I became aware of him taking ibuprofen like they were jelly beans and asking, well, what's going on? He said, I didn't tell you. I fell the other night coming back to bed from the bathroom. What do you mean you fell? You tripped? No, I fell asleep and then I fell.
Oh my
And,
goodness.
But because he was in so much pain for so many other reasons, we just like, okay, great, something new, big whoop.
Right.
But he came home to me with this broken hip and in a wheelchair and addicted to oxycodone, which the hospital was wonderful about being proactive and saying, okay, here's the deal. He's on these painkillers. He's going to be on these painkillers until he's strong enough to have the hip surgery and through the hip's recovery. And here's how we're going to manage that. And I was really grateful for that. But it was just the two of us, and now I can't remember your question. I'm sorry.
Well, no, but I was just asking, like, did you have an established routine? And you're like, well, I mean, I did, but then all this stuff happened. And so I kind of want to talk about how you were still able to do something. Like, how did you adjust there?
Yeah. So Ben arrived home and he was in his own room because of his multiple issues. And I had a baby monitor so I could hear him if he needed me. All he needed to do was sort of roll over and whisper, I need my pills, or I need help getting to and from the bathroom, or whatever. But I could also wake up at 5 a.m. and go do my meditating and things before he, hopefully most of the time, before he needed anything from me. So it couldn't be a bad day if I'd managed to start with something that was solely for me and to try to remind myself through the day, when everything's falling apart. Well, at least I did have that. I had that 15 minutes this morning where I could breathe and where I could be calm and get ready to approach whatever was going to end up being thrown at us. So
I love that you said that, because I think that is so important to have. I'm a morning person too, so mine's always tucked into the beginning of the day. But some people are night people or whatever. But like even if it's 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 1 minute, I don't know, because everybody has a different thing. But if you take that moment and you tuck it in and say, this is for me, then you can say, yes, I did pay attention today. I did pay attention to me today for this time.
And in a way, I may owe it to my grandmother, not because of caregiving at all, but because she, for breakfast, would have 10 M&Ms.
Oh my goodness.
She loved M&Ms, and so she would have 10 M&Ms. And that way, when she craved chocolate through the day, it'd be like, I've already had my chocolate. I already treated myself to chocolate. She just like,
and tomorrow I can have more.
Yeah, this is my self-care. Right. This is my self-care. I've taken care of this one thing that I know I love. And so it's 10 M&Ms and a glass of Coca-Cola for breakfast.
Love it.
Yeah.
That is classic.
Yeah. So I guess maybe it's kind of, lead with a little bit of self-care, maybe lead with a bit of indulgence.
Yes. I just wrote a blog recently about that. Like, just here are 5 things anybody can do. And like that whole idea of like, one of the things is savor something, do something that you love and savor it. And so, it can be, eating the M&Ms or,
right,
reading your favorite author or whatever, even if it's only for 5 minutes. So I do love that. Thanks for sharing that.
Or, awesome. Yeah. Or watch a YouTube. I've got friends who, there's some Instagram things that they just look at of babies laughing. It makes you laugh, and laughing is a healthy thing to do. So.
Right. There's so much discussion around social media, and it's like, but for the chronically ill person that can't get out of bed, it's my mom's lifeline. So like Facebook, it's like she's made it. Hers is a happy place. I don't know what everybody else's Facebook looks like, but hers is a happy place for her. Right. And then also, like you say, sometimes you just need, an animal hugging another animal.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can't get to the
dog
zoo.
That dog and that zebra who are best friends or whatever it is. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that so much. Now one of the things that you mentioned is the crisis.
Yes.
And how to manage your self-care during that, or how to, deal with all of the emotions. But one of the things when we encounter crisis after crisis after crisis, which we often do when we're caregiving for a loved one who has chronic illnesses that continue to compile on each other, that's your experience, that's mine, I know that's many other caregivers' experiences, is that can lead to a chronic state of trauma. And I know a lot of caregivers who have been diagnosed specifically with PTSD or complex, there's complex PTSD. And so I know that you have some ways that you could share about like how we can maybe manage that, or what your experience is, because we talked a little bit beforehand about like a lot of people don't want to think about caregiving as traumatic because it's supposed to be sunshine and roses and a blessing and a wonderful, and like you said, like, and
right,
in sickness and in health.
Yes. Yeah, you take those vows when you're a child, if you're lucky. I mean, we've been married for 43 years, and I feel very lucky that he's still with me. But you make those promises in sickness and in health, and then the years go by that you kind of forget that. There's the chaos of the controlled chaos of raising a family and dogs and careers and all the rest, and then suddenly you find yourself thinking, "Oh wow, this would be the in sickness part."
Right.
And I realized that one of the things that I've been aware of kind of all my life, or from as an adult, that people talk about the dignity of the patient and preserving the dignity of the patient, and how critical that is, how important that is, how wonderful that is to be a part of preserving the dignity of the patient. And then when you are in the caregiving part up to your eyeballs, you realize, wait a minute, there's also the dignity of the caregiver. Can somebody help me with my dignity? I'm handling things that I never expected to be handling. I'm not trained to do this. And some of the things aren't things you necessarily need to be trained with. You're cleaning up stuff you never imagined you'd be cleaning up. And there's trying to find that dignity for yourself and preserve that dignity for yourself was a big step for me to realize I needed to do. And then there are the traumatic parts of it. We call the hospital because my husband was in the hospital for 10 weeks. I couldn't go visit him, but I want updates, and I don't want to be a problem. I don't want to be the squeaky wheel, but really I haven't heard from a doctor in 2 or 3 days. I've talked to a lot of nurses, and my husband was not able to handle his own phone or do an iPad for a while. His manual dexterity was gone. And so we were dependent upon the nurses helping out with those things. And I would call and get put on hold. The hold music it's an electronic soundtrack that I've heard. I've had a bank use it. I've had a couple other places use it in the years since then. And if I hear that hold music, it triggers something. It makes me go, why aren't they answering the phone? Is it because he's gone flatline? Where is everybody? Why? It's a hospital. Why isn't somebody answering the phone? So it comes down to breathing, stepping back. Sometimes if the hold music went on for, I don't need to be on hold. I can hang up. I can set a timer for 20 minutes and go for a walk and come back and try again. Sometimes it's hard to disconnect and make yourself take that step back. Sometimes phone a friend, very helpful.
Very helpful.
And I have one friend I've heard this line other places too, but she'll say, do you want to be heard, hugged, or helped? I need to know what feedback you want here. I can sit and listen to you. I can make suggestions, but if you don't want suggestions right now, tell me you don't want suggestions. And I can't really hug you from long distance, but know that I'm sending positive energy your way. So just trying as much as possible to look for the good. There's always always something for which to be grateful. I mean, right now I don't live in Ukraine. I'm not worried about my borders. I have a roof over my head. I have a refrigerator with food in it. There are so many other things that could be going wrong, and in the scheme of things, we're pretty lucky. So,
you have given us so much wisdom today, and I am feeling really grateful for you. And being in the caregiving space for so long, sometimes I feel like I've heard it all. And then like somebody comes and says some of the things that you have said today, and it has been eye-opening and heartwarming. And I am still processing the whole dignity piece that, of course I advocate for caregivers to care for themselves. But when you said, yes, it is about our loved one's dignity, but we are also people. We have dignity. We need to foster that or reach out for help with that, or however. Right. I just love that you brought that up, because I think you brought up a lot of important things that I don't think we think about a lot. And I really appreciate your honesty and your openness and your willingness to share the depths of your story. And I know we're just cracking the surface, which is why I want to make sure to mention your book. It's out, right?
It comes out April 2nd.
Okay. So it'll be out. I think this episode will be airing, before that, but it'll be out. It's around. Your book is called On My Way Back to You, and it'll go, I imagine it'll go even more into your journey and your story. Can you tell me a little bit about that book? And of course, as an author myself, I want to know more about how you wrote it. But for the purposes of this, tell us a little bit about what you share in that book that caregivers can really resonate with, that you think would be good for them.
Well, some of the grossly practical stuff that other caregivers shared with me. One friend in particular, when she heard he was coming home from the hospital and that it had been a cardiac situation, she suggested things like having clean sheets around. He came home long enough after his surgery that I didn't have to do this, but she talked about how her husband had night sweats. And so she had clean sheets right there to change the bed right away. One of the other things, and this I still do, and he's been out of the hospital for 4 years. She said, take all the pill bottles, and instead of having them in front of you, write on top of them what they are. So his pill bottles live in a box, and for her it was a huge Tupperware container. And I can see when I look into the top of the box where everything is, and every couple of weeks he's got all these the weekly four doses a day things, and I'll spend every couple of weeks. I will fill in a couple of weeks worth of pills, and I can see what I've got. I can see that this is the first bottle of 2. I can see it made such a tremendous difference, as opposed to having to always pick up the bottle and go, oh yeah, this is the Prograf. Oh yeah, this is the cell set. One of the other things that I don't have as much anymore, but I did have, we had a hospital go bag, and the things in the hospital go bag were the chargers for the phone, the charger for his hearing aid, an extra pair of glasses, an extension cord, mailing labels that we could put on things that they would give him in the hospital that were going to be his to take home, just address labels, a Sharpie marker. So things like that, just grossly practical stuff like that.
But then you also are going to be like, I can't wait to get the book, honestly, because the conversation with you has been so wonderful and heartwarming that I can't wait to dive into your book, because I imagine it's going to be much like our conversation today, just very open and authentic. And so I really do appreciate that. Just side note with the whole phone cord thing. In the last 5 years, my mom's gone to the hospital like 37 times. And almost every single time when it wasn't like an extreme crisis, like when she was coherent, she would say, don't forget my phone charger. as she's being like taken out. It's like, she doesn't care about anything else. She's like, they have medicine at the hospital, but I need my phone charger.
And the one time we didn't take it, it was like, oh my, what were we thinking? Well, of course they were going to admit you. Why didn't we bring the phone charger? And he's like, well, I can borrow one from a nurse. Yeah.
Which we have done that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Plenty of times.
Well, yeah, the book it's a love story. It's a bit gritty. It was a near death. He nearly died and he came back to me. So, people ask me today how he's doing, and I'll say he's doing so well that more than frequently he annoys the Jesus out of me, and it's wonderful. It's just,
yes.
I'll roll over in the middle of the night and he's snoring, and I'll think, what other people would give for this gift to listen to this guy snore.
But then do you poke him a little bit?
Yes, I do. I poke him and say, I love you very much, but you are snoring. So please roll over. So,
well, one of the things that your publishing company, your media group has offered to do is do a book giveaway. And so if you, so I want to invite all of you who are watching and listening to go to the description or the show notes. I will give you directions on the giveaway there, and you can enter to get a copy of On My Way Back to You by Sarah Cart. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope I can have you back on. I would love to just keep chatting with you. We're both in Florida. We both, all these things. But thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you and you sharing your story.
Thank you. You do an amazing service. And like I said, if I had known that such a thing existed 4 years ago when I was really in the thick of it, it would have been such a gift. So thank you for the gift you provide to everyone out there.
Thank you for joining me today. From Guilt to Good is a proud member of the Whole Care Podcast Network. To access additional self-care resources that help you feel good, not guilty, and learn more about the book giveaway that we're doing, mentioned in this episode, check out the show notes or description or head to theselfcaregiver.com. Subscribe now and joining me in going from guilt to good as you rediscover your worth, reclaim your health, and get back the life that you've been too busy to enjoy. And if you've enjoyed this show, please take a moment to leave a review. Your feedback matters. We're redefining self-care for caregivers one step at a time, one episode at a time. And until next time, remember, you are worthy of the same care you give others.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.